All right, folks, thank you for joining us. This is our Species on the Edge 2.0 mentor session. A couple of reminders here first. Um, Video submission deadlines are April 18th. There is going to be there's actually already a link on the website to share that. I just want to make sure I can see everybody. To share that, you can also follow this QR code. It'll take you directly there. If you are a teacher, if you are the facilitator of a youth group, my suggestion would be have a YouTube channel that your students can upload their videos to in order to be able to share it with us. All right. Let's see, how come this isn't moving? Ben, are you able to move a screen? It's not letting me. I'm
I'm not
sorry.
sharing at the moment.
All right, let me see. I can't figure out why it won't let me
I can
move forward. Let me try this
I
one
can share
instead.
mine if you want me to, but
Let me try that. Oh, okay, there it goes. All right. So if you missed I apologize, folks. If you missed our information session last month, which is basically a breakdown of how the competition works, there is video access to it on our website. So under the education tab, Species on the Edge 2.0, it is loaded there. Again, submission process, there is a Google form that you will be uploading your video onto for deadlines April 18th. We did talk about disclaimers. During the information session. One of the big things is content or actions that might disqualify your team. The information session or the mentor session that we are hosting today gives you permission. You are allowed to use this content for your videos. However, make sure that you provide, the proper ownership. So, let people know who the biologists are. So a lot of folks will do like a video with credits and things like that to um, highlight who the folks are on the video. So we're gonna feature our wildlife biologists. They're gonna give us a little bit of a rundown of the work they do, and then we will have a question and answer session towards the end. So if you know you have some questions, please write those down, and we'll allow everybody to ask questions at the end. I just want to make sure everybody gets the information first. All right. So I think let's see, Ben, you are up first.
yep. How's everyone doing? Thank you for being here. So yeah, I've been working for Conserve Wildlife Foundation for over 15 years now in New Jersey. I work mainly with coastal raptors and also terrapins, and I do some habitat enhancement as well. So with ospreys, they're one of my main focal species that I work with, and hopefully most of you are familiar with them. If not, then I will give you a brief you know, little description of them. So they're a coastal nesting bird of prey. They feed exclusively on fish. So that's where they nest near water, where they find their main prey. And ospreys love nests like this that are over water. And of course, nesting along the coast. One of the biggest factors for them is nesting away from human disturbance. So that's where a lot of birds nest on platforms that are away from human disturbance or development, and that's where they're safe, or at least safer, I guess. But so one of the things that we've seen with ospreys is that their population has largely recovered from the effects of DDT and habitat loss from, the early 1900s to today. So we have a pretty robust population here, but like you're seeing in some of the pictures right here, that Vera's, kind of going back and forth on is one of the emerging threats that we're seeing more with ospreys, which is the persistent plastics that we find. So if any of you, even though ospreys are listed as stable, which means that they're not at risk of becoming endangered or threatened again, there still are threats to them in general, throughout the population here in New Jersey and worldwide. And some of the biggest ones are plastics, but also, pollution can still threaten them because they are sensitive to contaminants in the ecosystem and also overfishing, or just other possible effects to climate change in the future, where it could be migrating fish populations or shifting northward, and also just larger storms or more frequent storms, which may affect their overall productivity from year to year. So then, yeah, moving forward. So that's a little bit about ospreys and my work with them. But yeah, I'll be happy to answer anyone's questions about them. So terrapins are another species I work with, and they're actually listed as a species of special concern. And that was upgraded from a game species, which then they were made a non-game species because the threats to them, some of the biggest ones that we see are from roadkills, drowning in crab pots, just from either commercial crabbing or recreational crabbing, and also poaching or illegal collection of terrapins. So that's some of the major threats to them that we see, but also you could see here too with that picture right there how obviously predators can threaten terrapins as well, but they're more naturally occurring. But it really depends on the area and everything, and terrapins really just have a lot of threats throughout their range, but those are some of the biggest ones and ones that we can really try and reverse through positive change. So yeah, but the work we do with them as well is reducing roadkills in certain areas and also improving their nesting habitat. So these are just some pictures here showing some of my volunteers who monitor a wildlife management area where we have an enhancement site for terrapins to nest and where we also protect nests and ensure that the hatchlings successfully hatch and are released back into the environment. Look at that. Perfect timing. All right, Emmy.
Okay, I think I'm up next. Can you go to the next one? Next. So, hi everybody. My name is Emmy Casper. I've been with CWF for I think around 5 years. I started as a seasonal technician working with beach nesting shorebirds on the Atlantic coast. And then in 2022, I moved on to the Delaware Bay area of New Jersey, so the south area of New Jersey near Cape May and Cumberland counties. And I'm going to be highlighting three different species technically, but the first one being American oystercatcher. This is a very charismatic shorebird. As you can see, it's pretty unmistakable. It has a bright orange bill. It's specialized to eat marine bivalves, so they're called oystercatchers for a reason. They love to eat oysters and mussels, and they use their bill specifically to do that. They inhabit a wide variety of coastal environments, including sandy beaches, salt marshes, shell rakes, and even rooftops. For example, there are oyster catchers that nest in Atlantic City on the roofs because it's close to the water and they have gravel on their rooftops. They are ground nesters, so they lay their nests right on the substrate, whether that's the sand or the marsh or a shell rake, and they have eggs that are camouflaged to blend in with that substrate. And as you can see in that picture, their chicks are semi-precocial. That means that pretty much right after hatching, within a few hours, they're able to walk on their own. And these guys can't actually feed themselves. They do rely on their parents to bring them food and protect them. But other shorebirds, like the piping plover, will actually have to feed themselves. You'll hear about them later. And in New Jersey, American oystercatchers are listed as a species of special concern. Next slide, please.
Am I still sharing? Because I can't see it.
I think you're still sharing. I still see
Okay.
it.
Did it move to the next one? As long as you guys can
No,
see it. No. What about now?
no,
What
at
is
least not on
happening?
my screen.
Oh my gosh. Let me see if I can. Oh goodness. Sorry, folks. Let me try this again. How about now? What is happening?
I see the first slide.
Did it go?
There we go.
All
All
right.
right,
I
so
apologize.
as a coastal species, oyster catchers are vulnerable to a number of threats. Habitat loss from coastal development is a really big one. They're very sensitive to human disturbance, and oyster catchers nest during the same months where humans are spending a lot of time recreating on the beaches. So they do tend to overlap quite a bit. Um, Humans are definitely disturbing to oyster catchers. They will cause them to abandon their nests. And that's why it's very important to have disturbance buffers around nesting areas on beaches. Flooding is a big risk for oyster catchers because they do nest on the ground. And nest predators are also a huge threat, including mammalian predators like foxes and raccoons, and also avian predators like crows. So some conservation solutions that we are currently engaged in, there are multiple monitoring programs throughout the state where we monitor nesting pairs from the nesting stage all the way to the fledging stage. So when their chicks are old enough to fly. We do habitat restoration that can include sediment placement to create more habitat for nesting, or invasive species removal like Phragmites, which is an invasive reed. Predator control to kind of keep the predator population in check and keep those nests from being eaten. And then also disturbance protection. So that would include fencing off nesting areas and really engaging with the community to try to advocate for more beach nesting bird friendly behaviors like keeping dogs off of beaches or leashed. Next. So I just wanted to throw up some resources if you're interested in highlighting oyster catchers for your projects. Here's a story map about the Delaware Bay American Oyster Catcher Project, which is a new project that we're doing, just focusing on those birds nesting on the Delaware Bay beaches. We have guidance for evaluating human disturbance, and then you can get a wealth of information from the American Oyster Catcher Working Group. Next. And then I also just wanted to highlight salt marshes because it's another part of my job with the Conserve. So just a salt marsh is a wetland that's flooded and drained by the tides. They are being lost at a pretty alarming rate all over the world, but especially in the Northeast of the United States. This is partly due to sea level rise. Sea levels are increasing at a very quick rate that salt marshes cannot keep up with. We're also draining and filling a lot of our salt marshes for coastal development. And we have a really strong history of modifying our salt marshes for farming and also mosquito control. Next slide. And this means that we have multiple marsh nesting species that are at high risk of becoming extinct. The ones I want to focus on are black rail and salt marsh sparrow. These are both species that nest in salt marshes, and they nest right above the high tide line in vegetation. So they are very susceptible to flooding and habitat loss. The black rail is considered like a ghost in New Jersey. They're very extremely rare and they're very secretive, so it's very hard to detect them. You'll never really see one, you might hear one. And they are endangered in New Jersey. The other is a salt marsh sparrow, which is special because it is specifically endemic to the Atlantic coast salt marshes, and they are experiencing a rapid population decline of around 3% each year. New Jersey is a hotspot for their population, so it's very important we conserve them here, and they are a species of special concern. Next. And they really rely on the area of the marsh that's called high marsh, which is the middle of that diagram there. It's a transition between the lower elevation and the higher elevation uplands, where there's a specific plant and elevation that's best for them. And that area of the marsh is being lost at a very high rate. So that's a priority to keep that area safe. Next. So their biggest threats are the loss of that high marsh habitat due to sea level rise and development. And connected with that is the increased risk of nest flooding as those areas are being flooded more and more often. And then conservation solutions for that are to protect existing high marsh habitat and future high marsh habitat, and then restore degraded marsh. So I listed a few options for marsh restoration, include sediment deposition, runneling, which is like building little channels in the marsh, ditch remediation, and microtopography, which is creating little nesting mounds for these birds. Next slide. So if you're interested in learning more, there's some really, really great resources out there for these species. All of these conservation plans have just a wealth of knowledge that can help any project. So I just wanted to throw those up there instead of talk forever about it. And I'm happy to answer any questions about salt marsh species and oyster catchers.
Thank you. Larissa, whenever you're ready.
Um, Hi, my name's Larissa Smith, and I have been working with Conserve Wildlife since 2000. And the one of the main projects I work on is the New Jersey Bald Eagle Project. And I also work on Eastern Tiger Salamander, shorebird stewards, and a variety of other stuff. So as far as bald eagles, I think probably everybody knows that they are doing very well in New Jersey. They made a really big comeback. They were delisted in January off the New Jersey State Threatened and Endangered list. They're now a species of special concern, but they are still protected federally under the Golden and Bald Eagle Act and the Migratory Bird Act. So their nesting and roost sites are still protected. So as the state, we're mandated by the state of New Jersey to still monitor all known nests in New Jersey. Next slide. So you can see here, this is a map of the nests from last nesting season. And we are now monitoring, there was 264 active nests last year, which means that eggs were laid in the nests. And we're monitoring well over 300 pairs total. And you can see they're throughout the state in all 21 counties. And how do we monitor all these nests? We use volunteers. We have a really great nest monitoring program. We use 160 volunteers who keep eyes on these nests for us during the nesting season. And right now we're in the middle of it. We have a lot of eagles incubating on eggs. We have some nests that already have chicks, and some have yet to incubate. And the volunteers who are out there tell us what's going on in the nests. Next. These are some of the volunteers who monitor for us. They're trained. They know not to get close to the nest, how to monitor them without disturbing the nest. They're not just monitoring, but protecting the nests and also educating the public, landowners, people who just say, stop by and say, what are you looking at? And are curious, educating them how to live with eagles in New Jersey. Next. This is one of the nests I threw in of an adult feeding a young chick. And it's very important right now. Every nest is different. We have nests in rural areas. We have nests in more suburban areas in people's backyard. And eagles are very prone to disturbance from people who don't realize that they're getting too close. And this is a really sensitive time of year for them. And next, even though, the number of eagles are increasing, they're doing well, we still really need to keep an eye on them. There's a lot of factors out there in New Jersey. One is habitat loss, pressure for development, electrocution of eagles, collisions with vehicles, power lines. Right now we have the avian influenza, which is affecting the eagle population. We know that some have tested positive. We don't know quite yet how it'll affect the season, nesting season. And another problem that affects eagles is lead poisoning. And they get that from when they eat a carcass that, like a deer that has been shot with lead shot. And one thing we're trying to do is get hunters to use alternative shot instead of lead that wouldn't poison eagles and other raptors. And then, of course, there's competition between eagles, and as they increase, we're seeing more and more of that. Next. And my other species that I work with, and one of my favorites is the Eastern Tiger Salamander. And they are an endangered species in New Jersey, and they are found in very localized spot in the southern part of the state, mostly Cape May County, a little Cumberland, a little Salem. Next. And basically the salamander needs vernal pools for their life cycle. So tiger salamanders live in burrows year round, and then they are early breeders. So in December, January, February, they are actually moving to the pools. They're earlier than other salamanders. And they need those pools to lay their eggs. And then when the eggs hatch, they turn into larvae, and then they turn into adults and go back on land. So, the salamanders are susceptible, like a lot of amphibians, to a lot of different issues. Next. A lot of threats down here, saltwater intrusion, getting into some of the vernal pools that are closer to the ocean. The pet trade is an issue. Collectors come out and get the adults in the wild. Runoff, pollution getting into vernal pools. Once again, development. And this year, just global warming. The drought has affected a lot of the vernal pools down here. They didn't fill up, and so we only really have two areas where there was any breeding, and it was very few egg masses compared to other seasons. Next. And so we basically go out with the state of New Jersey and we monitor the pools to see, the water levels, salinity, and how many egg masses are in those pools each year. And like I said, this year it's really only two areas that have any egg masses in them. Next. And so that's one salamander I work with, but there's salamanders throughout the state, and there's a lot more and variety in northern New Jersey if you're interested in those. And these are just some of the things that you can do to help salamanders right now. We're in the middle of migration season. CWF just did a amphibian crossing last night. Just reducing chemical fertilizers, not putting pesticides on your lawn, leaving leaves, all that kind of stuff is really important for amphibians just in general. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Todd.
Okay, hello, I'm Todd Pover. I'm biologist at Conserve Wildlife, and I've been working with endangered beach nesting birds for about 30 years, most of those here at Conserve Wildlife. Next, please. And so when we talk about beach nesting birds in New Jersey, we're primarily talking about these four species. In the top left, that's a piping plover. Top right is a black skimmer. Bottom left is American oystercatcher, and then the bottom right is a least tern. Emmy obviously talked about the oystercatchers quite a bit, so I'm not going to focus on them too much, but they do nest all along the Atlantic coast as well as the Delaware Bay that she was talking about. Aside from the oystercatcher, those other three species, they're all state endangered here in New Jersey. And just to give you an idea, for the piping plover last year, we had less than 90 pairs of them in the entire state. And so that's one of the lowest numbers we've ever had, but makes them one of our most at-risk bird species here in New Jersey. Next. And so, when we say beach nesting birds, Emmy alluded to this, but I wanted to show you some pictures. We are talking about them laying their eggs right there on the sand, sometimes bare stand or a little bit of vegetation, but generally they're out in the open. Their eggs are only the size of a quarter. They're sand colored. So when they're out in a very large beach area, it's hard for a predators, things like gulls or crows or fox will eat their eggs and the chicks and sometimes the adults as well, but they rely on camouflage. So they're right out in the open. Next. If they do hatch, it takes about 30 days to hatch. The chicks are very small. You can kind of see that clamshell on the front, and the chick's not much bigger than that when it's born. As Emmy alluded to, just like oystercatchers, the plovers are up and about after a few hours of being born. And for them, it's especially critical because the parents do not feed them at any point. They have to feed on their own. And the sort of most productive or best food is the intertidal zone. So that's the area right along the tide. And when it's exposed at low tide, there's invertebrates and worms, marine worms that they feed on. So they're trying to get down to the water. So if any of you have ever gone to the beach, or even if not, you can kind of guess that's also where the most people want to be. They're there to swim, to kind of cool down on the hot weather. And so the birds are very susceptible to human disturbance, but also if there are a lot of people down by the water, they can't get down to feed. And so this is one of several things that puts them highly at risk. Next. And so just to give you a quick idea, what are some of the things we do? Like a lot of the other species in the biologist has been talking about, we closely monitor the number of pairs, how, I think Ben alluded to productivity, and by that we mean the number of chicks they produce in a year. Sometimes they do very well, other years very poorly. But in order to determine if they're recovering or doing better, we have to track these things. In addition to that, we obviously do a lot of management to protect them. Those pictures in the top there on the right, we do put fence up on the beach where the birds nest. We either go out and find the nests and then put it up, but the birds, like many birds and species, have something called really high site fidelity. And what that really means is they like to come back to the same location year after year. So because of that, oftentimes we go out about this time of the year, we can put up fence around the areas that they come back year after year to try to protect them from their nests getting trampled by people, run over if there's vehicles on the beach. And then we have a lot of protections we try to put in place to try to minimize the amount of activity that's down by the water where they nest so that those chicks can get down there and feed. And then we do a lot of education and outreach with the public and with school groups, things like that, so that when beachgoers go to the beach, they know a little bit more about how they can help them. Just one last quick little thing. You see that in the bottom right, that's a cage we put around some of the plover nests. It's got holes in it big enough that the adults can get in and out to their nest. The nest would be in the middle of that, but small enough that those predators I mentioned, large other birds or fox or cats, can't get in and eat their eggs. So that's another thing we sometimes do to help protect them. Next, please. And Emmy mentioned this, but this deserves another mention. One of the big problems we have is dogs on the beach, either on a leash or sometimes even not. The birds believe they are like a fox or a coyote or some kind of mammal, and it scares them away, but also the adults will go and kind of a chase after the dogs and leave their chicks exposed and alone. And when you say, so if you had a crow on your beach and then a dog came running and the adult went to deal with the dog, it leaves it vulnerable for a crow to come in and try to go after the chick. So there's direct impacts we talked about, and this is more of an indirect human disturbance, but it's a big problem we have on most of our beaches with beach birds. Next. And then just a few more slides. I just want to give you, this slide I think is really cool. This is a beach, and you can kind of see all those footprints in the sand, and then you can see our fenced area and how it's undisturbed. If we did not put up this fence to try to protect the areas where the birds are laying their eggs, they would certainly be trampled. And this is just a good, clear example of how our fence can help protect the birds. Next. And one other thing we can do, most of our New Jersey coast in particular is highly developed. There's a lot of houses, businesses, there's boardwalks, there's a lot of people there too. And so we do some habitat restoration or enhancement to try to improve the habitat, kind of back to how it might have been years ago before there's a lot of development. Next. And so this is Barnegat Light, New Jersey. And if you're interested resource-wise, if you Google Barnegat Light habitat restoration, piping plovers, there's a really cool video about this, give you some ideas for videos perhaps even. But you can see there's a lot of dark brown and green in here, and that's a lot of vegetation on the beach. Our birds like that open habitat. Next, please. So we took the site and we actually got rid of some of the vegetation. We used a bulldozer. It wasn't anything too complicated. Next. And so in this picture, you can see the finished product. We had about 40 acres, and there's the lighthouse if anybody's ever been to Barnegat Light. we cleared about 40 acres and we put in ponds where the birds could go and feed. I told you they go down to the water's edge, and we put these in an area, and then we put a fence around the whole area during nesting season and create sort of like a plover park. I just wanted to point out, you can see the really dark green area in the upper left. That's what this whole area pretty much looked like before we did this restoration back to a type of beach that our birds like to use. Next, I think that might be it. That is. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Leah.
All right, hi everyone. My name's Leah. Um, I've been working with bats since 2018. I started at Conserve in 2019 as an intern and then gained part of their staff in 2020. You can go to the next slide. So we have a couple different bat projects that I'll go over at Conserve Wildlife Foundation. But before I get into that, I just want to go over some of the bats that we have here in New Jersey. So you can go to the next slide. So we have 9 species of bats found in New Jersey. We have 3 part-time residents, and these are our migratory species of bats. This is the silver-haired bat, the hoary bat, and the eastern red bat. So these bats are only really found here during the summertime, and then in the fall they'll make their migrations down to warmer climates, where they'll spend the winters, and then in the spring they'll make their way back up north. Next slide. And then we have our 6 full-time residents. These are our hibernating bats, where they'll be found in the wintertime in caves or mine hibernating. We have the northern long-eared bat, which is a federally and state endangered species. The tricolored bat, which is a state endangered species. The little brown bat, another state endangered species. The Indiana bat, which is a state and federally listed endangered species. Small-footed, which is an endangered species. And then the big brown bat, which is a species of special concern in New Jersey. So as you can tell, we have our bats are kind of struggling here in New Jersey. Next slide. So like I said, in the fall and the winter, those 6 species will go towards these caves, where they'll go into a form of hibernation called torpor. Their metabolism drops to the bare minimum. They're breathing only a couple times per minute. Their heart's beating only a couple times per minute, and their body drops to the ambient air temperature inside of the cave or the mine. Next slide. And then the spring and the summer, once the temperatures get warmer at night above 50 degrees and the insects start flying again, the bats will leave their hibernation area and go towards their summer roosting site. So the males and the females will split up, and the females will form maternity colonies where they'll raise their young together. And certain bats, like certain roost. So the big brown bat and the little brown bat will roost in our human-made structures or under bridges, bat boxes, in your attic, in your barn. And then a lot of our migratory species like to roost underneath leaves and underneath bark. And then some species like our eastern small-footed bat will roost on cliff sides or in rock crevices. Next slide. So some benefits to bats. So all of New Jersey's bats are insectivorous. So they only eat insects, and they eat a lot of insects. So a little brown bat can eat up to 3,000 insects in a single night. They're our main predators of nighttime insects. You can just imagine, if we didn't have bats, how many insects would be flying around at nighttime. They eat mosquitoes, and a lot of beetles and moths. Next slide. So some threats that bats face. The biggest threat that bats face is white nose syndrome. This is a fungal disease that affects our cave hibernating bats. What it basically does is it attaches to their muzzle and their wing membranes, and it causes them to wake up way more frequently during their hibernation. So each time they wake up, they're burning their fat reserves that normally helps them survive throughout the winter. And they keep waking up, burning those fat reserves, and they basically end up starving to death. This hit New York around 2008 and 2009, and it caused mass mortality. Over 98% of our bat species in New Jersey perished from this fungal disease. So we had about 30,000 bats in a cave up in Rockaway Township, and we currently have about 300 bats left in that cave. And then another threat that bats face, and like all animals face, is habitat loss. If we don't have, the habitat for them, there's not food for them to live, no place for them to, live at, they're gonna perish. And then wind energy is a threat to our migratory species of bats, just like our migratory birds. But the bats seem to think these are trees, and they go really close near these wind turbines, and they get hit by the blades. So that's an issue there, another issue they're facing. Next slide. So what do we do at Conserve to protect our bats? So we have a couple different projects. We have two volunteer-based projects, that is our summer bat count and our mobile acoustic surveys. These help us get population estimates. So our mobile acoustic surveys, we have volunteers that drive these pre-described routes every summer. And as they drive, they have these microphones that stick out of the window, and as the bats fly over, it picks up their calls. And just like bird calls, all bats have a unique call to them. So we run it through a software program, and it lets us know what bats were where. And then we have our summer bat count. So if you know where bats are roosting, we have volunteers go out and count the bats as they exit at night. This helps us get population estimates over each year. And then we have bats in buildings. So if you have bats inside your attic and you don't want them there anymore, we do provide bat houses because bats have a really high site fidelity. So they like to come back to the same spot year after year. So if you get an exclusion done and you don't put up a bat house, it becomes your neighbor's problem. So these bats like to go in the bat houses that are attached right where they were entering into the house. And then our final project, and probably my favorite project, is our mist netting and radio telemetry project. This is where I get to go, up close and personal with these bats. But we do have a project with the military base. We're wanting to see what bats are in the area, so we put up these fine nets that catches bats. We take data on them and then we release them. And if we catch any of the endangered bats, we will put a radio transmitter on them because we want to know where these bats are roosting throughout the day. And once we find their roost, we let the government know, and they can't do any projects within a 1.5-mile buffer of that roost. Next slide, I think that might be it. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, folks, I'm gonna stop sharing screen here. And then as folks have questions, you can either raise your hand, or we already have some questions coming into the chat here. So first question, Leah, are the drop in insects a cause or concern for endangered bats?
I would say more so we have a lot of insects, but pesticide use is definitely a big issue that we're facing bats. I think there's a couple studies being done that with spraying pesticides and the bats eating the insects that have the pesticide on them is causing harm to the bats. But yes, certainly if you're gonna, if there's an area or a neighborhood that uses high pesticides, which lowers the amount of insects that are in that neighborhood, the bats are going to find somewhere else to go, and then you lose species in that specific area.
Thank you. Any other questions? There have to be questions. You can unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, I have a question.
Go for it.
So my students are doing the smooth green snake, and I don't know if there's anybody who's also a snake expert. Sorry. If there's anybody who's also a snake expert, because it doesn't seem like anybody's really like a snake person here.
Leah,
They can reach out to me. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I do have experience working with rattlesnakes, and I have, some background knowledge on snakes.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, we have in the chat from April. Ben, I think this is going to you. What is the population of the northern diamondback terrapin in New Jersey, specifically in the Cape May County area? And there's follow-ups, but I'll give you one at a time.
That's in the chat where I could see that.
Can you see that? I think it's directly to me here.
I
Do you want me
don't
to repeat
know.
it?
Sure.
What is the population of the northern diamondback terrapin in New Jersey, specifically Cape May County?
Good question. We probably don't know, or we don't have the answer to that. So
Okay.
no one really knows the overall size of the population of terrapins in New Jersey.
Does increasing climate change temperatures have the potential to disrupt the terrapin male or female ratio, since temperature determines sex of the eggs?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's something that has been brought up with like sea turtles, especially ones obviously that nest near the equator, saying like, Costa Rica and places like that. But I don't think we really know necessarily, or it's too early, to really see those changes, I guess. Because yeah, it really depends on the depth of nests for terrapins, and not that females could really adapt to this very quickly or know, the sex of their young because they are determined by the soil temperature. But who knows if they'll start digging nests deeper or in different locations. I mean, we find that a lot of terrapins like to nest near vegetation in areas where we survey or see them nesting. They kind of use that as cover almost, whether from, aerial predators when they're actually actively nesting or, after they do lay eggs and then cover up their nests, then they're kind of masked by some, whether it's dune grass or a shrub or other, overarching vegetation kind of.
Awesome. All right, general question for everybody. How has climate change specifically impacted New Jersey coastal habitats?
Todd would be the best one to answer that probably, right? At least beachfront habitat, but
Yeah, I can give a crack at some of it. I mean, it's still a little early to say, but in addition to so a ground nesting bird on the beach, obviously, if sea level is going to rise at some point, there's going to be more flooding, and so we're going to lose more nests. But there's also some other issues to think about and research. There's suggestion that there's more frequent storms or they're more intense. So there's a lot of little, it's not just the obvious. There's some other things that all could potentially impact. One really interesting thing about storms and beach nesting birds, though, is this. They actually rely on storms to some degree to create their habitat. I showed pictures of that bulldozing the beach, and what we we're doing there is trying to mimic what a storm would do, take a habitat that was no longer suitable, it had too much vegetation for birds to nest, and make it, um, not a lot of vegetation and low lying again. So there's to some extent for this species, and that's a little different than probably any of the other species we're talking about, it could help them up to a point. It could create some more habitat. One real quick thing while I have my microphone on to the question the person had about terrapins and wanting to know the population. There are like populations like piping plover again is a good example where we know almost every single pair that nests in the state. And there's a lot of other species, terrapin being one, maybe salt marsh sparrows, where we don't actually know. And it's not it's because they're hard to survey. They just haven't been surveyed. Species like terrapin spends a lot of their time in the water, so they're hard to detect. The reason I'm bringing that up for when you're thinking about your projects, like one step for conservation and is to if it is a species, we call them information gaps, and so filling in those information gaps are an important part of any conservation plan to try to figure out what the next step is.
Thank you. What is the biggest threat to Jefferson salamanders in New Jersey?
I would say road mortality. Larissa can correct me if I'm wrong. And then also another threat that they face is that they hybridize with other salamander species. But I would say road mortality is the biggest threat that they face. And climate
Awesome.
change, but more directly, road mortality.
Does anybody have experience with red-shouldered hawks?
not directly, but I surveyed for them years ago doing
Jaden,
callback
do
surveys. What's the
Jaden, do you
question?
wanna, yeah, do you want to ask your question, Jaden? And let's see
Still
what
asking,
we
see what I can
get.
do.
Yeah. In the meantime, what methods do researchers use to monitor populations of coastal endangered species that are spooked by disturbances to their habitat? So, for example, northern beach tiger beetles, if anybody specifically knows about that.
Mm,
So Want me to repeat that or?
Not necessarily.
Yeah,
Uh,
insects are
That
one
would
of
probably be the
the-
best
yeah,
one.
tiger beetles. First of all, there's very few of them in New Jersey. Uh, they're very difficult, but people literally go out and count the larvae, or just count it by hand by sight in a lot of cases. So that's a really difficult species, though. There's only a very small population, and it's not stable at all. No, nothing fancy about it. Just you have to go out and count them physically, observe.
How do researchers track species like the Jefferson salamander? What are some specific methods?
Um, I guess egg mass surveys would be one way to just, I think Larissa might be better to answer this than me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't work with Jefferson because we don't have them down south, but I believe that with any salamander species, it would be counting egg masses.
Okay.
Because you can go out in the pool, you can count the egg masses, and then once the larvae hatch, they're dispersing. There's other predators in there that they're getting eaten, so it's a little harder to count them then. So I know with a lot of species, it's the egg mass counts.
All right, I have another terrapin. How does a diamondback terrapin navigate back to its nesting site during mating season, and what happens if the site is destroyed? And then there's another question, but let's do that first.
All right. So yeah, so a terrapin, okay, so they how does a female find her way back? So basically terrapins they have very small home ranges. Even though we have found individuals that do travel good distances. But yeah, I mean they more than likely use different things that they can see, whether it's different monuments or land masses that kind of help them navigate back. But yeah, I mean they will still move to different areas, to find suitable nest sites. And we see this a lot of times in the early summer where we have breeding congregations of terrapins, where they gather together in large groups, seeking out other individuals, and they congregate. And basically, then after that, they start coming up on the land where then they look for nest sites. And they might not necessarily nest right away, but they'll go up on the land, and try and seek out sites. And a lot of times they might dig a hole partially and then abandon the nest and then go back in the water, move to a different site and find a better one. And it really just depends on, yeah, if they find a suitable site, which usually means, one that's high enough or with appropriate soil for them to actually lay eggs. And in many cases, yeah, their habitat could be, degraded from construction projects or totally, lost from bulkheading, or the hardening of shorelines. So yeah, but they will move, to find open pockets of, marsh or upland habitat to nest. And we've even seen individuals where they like climb up docks and actually get into people's backyards where there are lagoons as well, and they're all bulkheaded too.
You might as well stay unmuted because this is about
Or
the red
another,
shoulder.
is there another terrapin question?
It's actually about the red shoulder.
Oh, the
What
red shoulder.
factors do you believe would be harming the red-shouldered hawks the most?
I mean, good question. I mean, for most species in general, habitat loss, I think is the biggest threat to them, besides possibly human disturbance or poaching. So with red shouldereds, yeah, they require forested wetlands to nest. And, if we're actively clearing, say forested wetlands, or those forests are even changing, through succession, or being dominated by different species, then, they might just not nest as much, or there might not be as much suitable habitat for them here as there are in other locations where, they do better.
All right, general question. How do we measure the socioeconomic impact of losing an endangered species?
Great question.
You're right.
I mean,
Yeah, I have to
for
be on this
bats,
stupid meeting.
at least for bats, if we didn't have a bunch of bats, they save the agricultural industry billions of dollars a year. They don't have to use as many pesticides. So if we didn't have as many bats, that would, increase the amount of insects, especially the crop eating insects. So we'd have to spend way more money on pesticides in that aspect for our food. And that's one socioeconomic thing I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, I'm going to address this a little differently. It was a great question, but it's actually one we're not really accustomed to answering very often because, our mandate so the birds are either federally, so the birds I work with, but the species are federally state endangered, and our sort of like our task, our niche is to focus on recovering those species because there actually are there's an Endangered Species Act, there's a state act that are just like regular laws that are, the goal is to recover those and have a diverse habitat. In case of the piping plovers, I often say they're probably not going to be the species that's going to be the cure to cancer. But, as a species in and of itself, we want to have healthy ecosystems and habitats as part of our quality of life, and not just go to the beach for recreation, although I love doing that too, but beaches that are natural. And so our species are, in many cases, all of our species are indications of, if they're present, of healthier ecosystems. So that's kind of the way we usually focus it. Leah is right, though. We do have some species that have some benefits economically, but again, we don't always look at it quite that way.
Yeah. Continuing what Todd said too. I mean, even with ospreys, one of the things we say, they are an indicator species. So, with healthy populations of ospreys and other top tier predators, it obviously shows that, our environment, where they live and that they depend on to find food is healthy, then obviously it's going to support also healthy economies along the shore, where no one's going to really want to go to the beach if it's loaded with pollution and plastic and the water, is dirty. I mean, so having these clean, healthy environments, where these species thrive, also help support our economy, especially our tourist economy, which is huge in a state like New Jersey.
Awesome. Would any of the shorebird experts be able to comment on the importance of horseshoe crab egg laying and locally nesting shorebirds? Are they just as important to them as they are to the redknots?
So I can comment a little bit on that since I do work on the Delaware Bay, and oyster catchers at least do overlap with that horseshoe crab spawning area. I can say that horseshoe crabs don't necessarily provide a food source to oyster catchers. Oyster catchers specialize primarily on those bivalves, but there have been observations of oyster catchers actually prying off snails from horseshoe crab shells. So they are an indirect food source. But horseshoe crabs do confer protection when it comes to human disturbance. So a lot of the beaches on the Delaware Bay are closed for a good 3 or 4 weeks to give the migratory shorebirds like the red knot space and freedom from disturbance. And because of that, the nesting shorebirds also get that space from human disturbance as well. So there is an indirect protection that comes from horseshoe crabs and migratory shorebirds. But just having the horseshoe crabs there is not necessarily giving the nesting birds more food when it comes to oyster catchers.
Ben, may I connect you with a teacher for other terrapin questions?
Oh yeah,
You know,
definitely.
okay,
Yeah.
great.
I mean, if anyone
Actually,
after this has more
I was going to
questions.
say along those same lines, if I'm contacted by a team who has questions, may I forward them to the biologist? Is everybody okay with that? I guess if you're not, let
Yeah.
me know.
Yep. Yeah, we could do a Google Meet, yeah,
Awesome.
anything. Yep.
Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, this might be like a bigger picture one that, anyway, are Jefferson salamanders dominated by other salamander species? Does anybody know that one?
Dominated in what way? Like they're competing for resources?
That's how I read it, but let's see. Do you want to expand on that? You can unmute yourself if you need to.
I'll just answer it with the best that I know of. I want to say, to be completely honest, I don't know. We don't have any invasive salamanders in New Jersey, so there's no, outside source. The salamanders that we do have, have evolved together. So they occupy, unique niches within the forest. So they're not really competing for, um, s- I would say, I don't think space and whatnot. Larissa, again, can correct me if I'm
Yeah,
wrong.
no, as far as adults, I mean, when they're in a vernal pool, you could have, like down here, we could have marbles or um tiger larvae, and say there's a tiger salamander larvae that's already larger, it could prey on and eat. The eggs are smaller larvae. They're even cannibalistic of their own kind. So, I mean, in that way, that happens, I think, in the vernal pool situation. But that's one of the reasons that they lay such large egg masses, that knowing that there's going to be a mortality of a large amount of them. But yeah, as far as adults, I think, like Leah said, they all have their own niche.
The follow-up to that was, how do they create hybrids? Do they create hybrids?
They do. I forget which one the Jefferson hybridizes with. The blue? No, I don't know. Um, they basically are closely enough related that they will, mate with each other and produce hybrids. I mean, it happens in bird species. But if that happens enough, then the original the original Jefferson salamander is no longer in the high numbers that it once was. It's now hybridized, and then a Jefferson will mate with a hybridized one, creating a second hybridized one, and so forth and so forth. But I think a lot of the consensus in New Jersey is that most of the Jefferson salamanders are already hybridized, but they're so hard to tell with the naked eye apart. You'd have to do genetic analysis, and that's expensive.
All right, I see a general video question. If we use pictures or videos of a species we didn't take, can we still use them? Yes, as long as you give credit to where you got that image. Everything needs to be sourced. So make sure you give credit to where you got the image, where you got the video. Anybody else?
I could also say that I think a lot of the pictures on our website already have permission, right? And probably the credits on them. So I think, Vera, is
Yeah.
that true?
Yeah, I think
That would
most of
be a
them
good
are
source.
illustrated. Yes, if it's an image that's on our website, it's going to be easier because it's already sourced for you. Absolutely. All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have any other questions, if you're looking for information about other species that weren't discussed, please contact me and I will put you in contact with the biologists. If you have any general questions about videos, please contact me. This is being recorded. Hopefully sometime in the next few days, it will be uploaded to our website. So if you need to, go back to the materials, you're able to do that. All right. So thank you all. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you to the biologists. Thank you for taking the time to be here.
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody. Thank you.